Hello, Arthur. Thank you for helping with my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Nathan. It's great to be here. Um, my name is Arthur Burns. I'm the editor of spaceweekly.com. I have been a space enthusiast uh, as long as I can remember. I attended the first uh, launches back in the 60s. I went, saw several of them, and then we went and saw a Apollo 11 launch, and that was just so interesting and name changing. Uh, I uh, I have a story I can tell about that sometime if we get a chance. Um, I live in the Daytona Beach, Florida area, so a little more than 60 miles from the Cape, so I can go out on my front lawn and watch every launch, and I do. I have on my phone Sky Guide, and so a couple of times a month the ISS passes over and it's visible, and um, the phone warns me, and we run outside, and the neighbors think my wife and I are crazy because we're holding our phones in the air. Oh, there it is over there. We're watching the ISS go over, and um, there are some things that you just can't explain to other people, but I guess it's the same reason some people go and watch country singers or rock stars. And I want to look up and see the stars. So I am semi-retired. I do real estate photography, and I'm a medical carrier. Uh, and I don't know which more I could say.
Well, I think it's amazing you got to see the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo launches. Um, what was, I mean, how did people think about the space race? The people in your like family and your friends and neighbors and like, what was the thought?
Well, when there's a big historic launch, a lot of the other neighbors will come outside and watch the launch. If it's just what they think is an everyday launch, my wife and I will be the only ones out there. And technology is so good that sometimes my wife will just stay inside. I can see it better from here. Look, they got shot from the rocket. And so we uh, we're basically the space people, and everybody else kind of just looked at us kind of funny sometimes. And somebody asked me last night, said, "Did you hear about William Shatner?" And I said, "Look, I'm a sci-fi fan. I'm a space fan. I think I've heard about William Shatner from about 300,000 different sources." And they laughed. I think that's great, which it was me. Um, it makes me think about how the 60s were the space age. We had Lost in Space, we had Star Trek, you had Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, which really wasn't space, but they had the flying sub. And if you ever want to fly in something like that, it just seems amazing. And so the folks know that I'm a space and science person, and I'm a bit hardcore because uh, the only real true science fiction movie out there is 2001: Space Odyssey, and maybe Forbidden Planet. Everything else is just a take on Gilligan's Island or similar shows. I love Battlestar Galactica, but it's basically Gilligan's Island in space. Are they going to make it home this week? Are they going to find Earth? Well, maybe they need another little more Gilligan in their stuff.
Did you see the inspiration for launch?
I think so. The watching the launches is inspirational. We watched the crew, the civilian crew launched just a couple of weeks ago. And I have, as I said, I've watched many launches, and that one was unique. I've never seen a launch like that. It was there was almost like an aura around it as it went off. It went through some clouds or a layer of atmosphere that they don't hit at that time of day or whatever normally. And there were just, it was amazing. And we could watch the booster coming back, and we don't hear the sonic booms here most of the time, so we didn't, but watching the launch and seeing it, we look at the stars and we see stuff that's light years away, and that's hard to sometimes understand. But when you're watching a launch and they're telling you that it's 700 miles downrange, and you're like, I'm looking at something that's 700 miles away. How often can you do that? Yeah.
Yeah, that was my first launch to see, actually, was the all civilian crew.
Wow.
And it was really amazing. I got the feel the heat seats at the Kennedy Space Center, viewing.
Oh yeah.
A lot of people were joking that the heat was actually free. But
well, in Florida, it's the heat and the humidity. So it's right now, you wouldn't believe it's fall if you're from up north. Hey Google, what's the temperature?
The temperature in Hollyfield right now is 79
right now
degrees.
It's almost 80 degrees, 79 degrees, and it's only a couple weeks from Halloween. The latest launch that I actually saw at the Cape was the Crew 1 launch, and we had VIP tickets to go there, and not because I'm the editor of Space Weekly, because they don't care much about websites. NASA's not really reaching out to websites, since I'm not a real TV station or radio station. I have a hard time getting press passes. Bugs the heck out of me, because when you look at some of the people that are doing science communication today, I mean, in my day, the science communicator of all time was who? Carl Sagan.
I would say, well, Carl Sagan. I think you may have been embarrassed by my answer. I was going to say it was Spock, but
that's good too. That was fictional, but yep, the real guy was Carl Sagan. And I don't think that if he was building a house and slammed his finger, Carl Sagan would use the F word. But we have a science communicator out there, Sci Gal or Sci Kid or Sci Babe, something like that. And she constantly uses the F word, and yet she has such wonderful things to say about science in general. And she would be great for the kids to listen to if it didn't have such a foul mouth. And I look at the world around me today, and that's partially being such a curmudgeon, because I look at your project says we're going to put people on the moon in 2024. And as a curmudgeon, I believe that you're wrong. And it's not because I want you to be wrong or I think that we shouldn't go. It's because I look at the political will that we have, and I think about how many times we've been this close before. The first, well, we'll go back to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan wanted to give us Star Wars and a space station. And of course, that never happened. The first President Bush made a commitment. And I don't think the ISS actually got started till, was it President Clinton? I have to think.
That's right. Yeah, no, it was Space Station Freedom under Reagan, and then whenever the Iron Curtain fell, and we wanted some way to keep their space program going. So
yeah, Well, and it's crazy because as a curmudgeon, I like to look at what the facts are, not what I think they should be and not what makes people feel good. We did not go to the moon originally for science, right? We went there to beat the Russians. Because if we could show them that we can put a man on the moon and return him safely to the Earth, we could easily lob a nuke right into the middle of Red Square. And Kennedy's science advisor said, well, I'll help you, but I'm not going to pretend it's science because it's for this reason. I wish I could remember the exact quote. And so right now, I think the biggest reason we have hope for putting someone on the moon soon is because now it's become, we're going to put a woman on the moon. This is going to be the first woman on the moon. So now we have the backing of what would have been the cancel culture. Well, we're not going to put a man on the moon. We've been to there already. Now it's going to be, we want to put the first woman on the moon. And if you watch all of the times they talk about it, that's always in the sentence. May not be the first thing, but it's always there. We're going to see the first woman step on the moon in our lifetime. And that's great. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying that that's the best hope we've got, because the political folks that might have shut it down if it had been just putting a man on the moon, those folks are going to help us and push hard to get a woman on the moon. And I really like the way that they're doing it, which was the way that some folks originally wanted it to do. The original thoughts about going to the moon, we were going to have a space station and we were going to launch from that space station. We were going to go to the moon. So we would already have had the infrastructure there in the 60s space station. But we had to get there. We had to get there before the end of the decade. And so we had to make a lot of changes. It's why there were no women astronauts at the time, because all of the folks that were flying in these tiny little tin cans were former test pilots, and they had to be able to stand the stresses and the training. And yes, we could have, but we might have missed the 70s deadline, 1970 deadline. I've been honored to have met Mae Jemison and chatted with her. Wish I had met Sally Ride, and she was a great person. And I'm hoping that 3-4 years from now, I can say, yes, there's a woman who's been to the moon and back.
Well, coming back to the Apollo program and our motivations for that about beating the Russians, I mean, I think you're right about that. The basis of the widespread support and actually got the funding to make it happen. And I think there are people that are surprised that Apollo stopped after Apollo 17. But, considering the motivation, what's more surprising is not that we stopped after Apollo 17, it's that we had Apollo 12, you know.
And that we had Apollo 14, because after Apollo 13, people were again asking, why are we going? Why are we putting people in danger? And if you have to ask that question, you just don't understand. I think that that what you said was right, that it was sad that we stopped after Apollo 7. Although we stopped aiming for the moon, but we did have the Apollo Soyuz test project and some other stuff. The saddest thing that's happened in my lifetime after the Apollo was when they stopped the space shuttle without having a follow-on program in place. They should have been continuing shuttle flights until we could launch our own astronauts from American soil. And people blame different folks for that. Some people blame Obama. Some people blame Bush, and it actually started under Bush. I kept hoping that President Obama was going to go back, but He is an academic, and that's the big fight in space between the academics and people who want to get stuff done. The academics will tell you, we don't need to put people in there. We don't need to put people in danger. All we need is robots. And as they said in the film, no bucks, no Buck Rogers. And people aren't going to say, oh, look at that great robot out there. Look at what it's doing. You know, they've said that about Hubble, which is nice. But when you can look at a person and you can say that, you know, they came from my hometown, or they came from my buddy's place. Look at that woman. She is flying high. Those are the kind of things that get people interested and will help with your funding. That's why we're on the edge. It's either going to go big or go home. My biggest worry is some of the stuff involved. I got muted out of Space Hipsters because I made some remarks about Boeing and their recent problems, and I look at what's going on with them, and I look at how they handled 737 MAX. When you look at some of the investigative reporting on that, and you look at how they lied to various people about that airplane and about the software, and you look at how far behind they are on their spacecraft launching, it's like, that's why you need somebody like an Elon Musk, who went out there and created SpaceX and did all of that. You know, pretends it's commercial, which some of it is, but you know, he would be nowhere without government money and the government contracts. So we talk about it being commercial, and we'd say, hey, look how good these commercial guys did. And really, the only thing, the main difference was that they don't have to have the 15 backup systems that NASA had. And he's not doing anything for the first time. Hey, you know, they landed boosters, but that was good and it was great. But we've done that kind of rocket work before. None of it was brand new. And when the Mercury went into orbit, that was the first time the Americans had orbited. And when we look back at space history, and there's a very interesting argument that Yuri Gagarin was not manned into space on a technicality. We didn't find out until after the fall of the Iron Curtain, as you mentioned a little while ago. We didn't find out that Yuri did not land in his capsule. He parachuted out, and the prize was supposed to be to land in the capsule. Now it's a technicality, but you know, when you look at the Russian space program, there's actually some talk, and it's been hard to determine, that there was a guy before Yuri Gagarin that made one orbit, landed in China, was held prisoner. You know, I don't know how much of it is just conspiracy theory and how much of it is true, but it's hard to find a lot of documentation about it. That is the best thing about America, is we do things in public. You know, if when Apollo 13 had its problem, you know, we didn't cut off all the outside world from watching what was happening. You could sit there and live what was happening, except when the TV stations got too many complaints that, oh yeah, Gilligan's Island is on and we want to watch, and they would cut away from it for a while. But we did a lot of things, most things, right out there in the open, and there wasn't this big secrecy surrounding it. we ended up later on during the shuttle program, we did have some classified shuttle launches that, you know, again led to a lot of speculation. You can go out on the conspiracy web and find out that those launches were to connect us with our alien overlords, such. But you know, it's just crazy when you see how people today treat science and space. And I love watching Ancient Aliens, and I sit there and I go, yeah, no, yeah, no, yeah, no, because they have yet to show how you can overcome that thing that we overcome with Star Trek, which is warp drive. And yes, every couple of months there's a clickbait thing that NASA scientists talk about warp drive. Well, yes, and maybe somewhere there's some tiny possibility, like when they talk about Star Trek transporters, talk about how two atoms are intertwined and spooky action at a distance. Well, all of that is on a atomic scale, and there's nothing that's been shown that we're ever going to be able to transport people or things from one place to another without a lot of rocket fuel. I really hope that we get an operational space station that becomes a wayfaring point. It's not just a place where we're living and working and doing hard science, that people will be able to go there. I watch all the startups, and I watch there was a fellow that came out with inflatable sections to add to the ISS. And my thought is that, wow, that'll be neat, sitting out there in this radiation field, only protected by however thin the inflatable section is. And we're not talking about being protected from micrometeoroids, which is something to worry about, but also from all of the constant radiation, which the metallic shell of the ISS does slow it down some and does make it less of an issue. I watched, again, here, since we're so close to the Cape, we had a company that's probably about 5 miles from my house that had gotten a lot of money because they were going to make these mini lunar landers, and we were going to be putting these landers on the moon by 2020. And of course, I'm gone, and that company went bankrupt and is gone. And I wish that I had the guts to go out there and ask people for money for an idea that I know is harebrained, and tell them that yes, it's going to happen. Because we look so much at the clickbait, and they'll say, you know, people fly with wings in 5 years. Well, whenever they say that, it means that, yeah, I have something that looks like it sort of works, and if I can get a lot of other people's money, we can keep trying it. And it probably won't work, but heck, you know, I have all their money, and that's all I need. How did you get into this?
You need people that are really passionate and want to make it happen, not people who are in it for just the economic reasons.
That's true. But when we look at things like Uber, and we see a company that's worth $60 billion and hasn't really made a dime, all their funding has come from investors. People are still investing in it, and people are still doing the work. And your average Uber driver makes about $1 an hour once you get all of the insurance costs and the car costs and maintenance costs. And they think they're doing great, and they don't realize how much they're adding to somebody else's pocket. I wish that some funding like that could go on for real space projects. It's absolutely amazing how much money people make with the GoFundMe and stuff for stuff that is absolutely worthless and won't happen. There's a guy that I interfaced with until he completely blocked me that was talking about the solar roads. They were going to put, every road was going to be paved with solar panels. And at this point in our technology, that is so harebrained of an idea, especially when you think of all of the environmental things. The earth moves. The reason that you get potholes and cracks is because the earth is shifted under the tar. And so you have big pieces of plastic blocks with solar panels in them that if they're not covered with snow in some places of the country, they're covered with sand in my part of the country. And the efficiencies of that working are really low. We're better off having solar satellites up there collecting and beaming power down to Earth. And it has a few of its concerns, like if you have a intense microwave beam sending the power from space down to Earth, and you have a passenger plane pass through it, you have a bunch of Kentucky Fried passengers. Every technology has its pieces that have to be worked out. So I was asking, how did you decide to do this project?
Well, so 2019, NASA had just hired Doug Laverio, who was associate administrator for the Human Exploration Operations Division of NASA, and he's tasked with getting us to the moon by 2024. So on Artemis Day, where they're like, core complete with the, SLS one core, he's there having his first employee address and what have you. And he has a lapel pin where he's counting down the days to the end of 2024.
That's cool.
And he's also going around NASA, selecting a NASA employee of the day to be like the hero of the day, the Human Exploration Operations hero of the day, the person, recognizing people that are actually making Artemis happen. So when I saw that, it was like 2019. I had been working at home for a couple of years before. I thought it'd be great to have a project where I interview everyday people. I was planning to interview people in person at Starbucks, on the street, at the mall.
Wow.
And I did that up into the COVID lockdowns. Then I had to become more flexible. And anyway, Doug, unfortunately, couldn't stay with NASA. He ended up essentially resigning right before Bob and Doug took off because of some contract issues. I think you had suggested to Boeing that they redo their human landing bid, and that communication is considered to be inappropriate, so he had to leave.
Boeing, once again, name pops up. Or a company who once used to know how to do things and now really needs somebody in there that can change the culture and get things moving along. But yeah, you're talking about the Artemis. They've had, when was their first test flight?
I believe you're talking about Boeing Starliner.
Well, the Starliner we're still waiting on, but you were talking about Artemis, where we had the SLS, the first launch. Wasn't that in 2018, 2019 when they first tested stack?
They had a static fire test. The so-called green run test.
Yeah.
Where they just had it in a test stand, but they haven't launched it yet.
I thought there was one test of the new Orion.
Of Orion, there was. They put that on a Delta Heavy, and I believe that was back in 2016.
2016.
Yeah.
That's my point, is we take so long and we're so far behind, and it's because we don't have the political will. You really need to get we really need to get a fire under some of these people and make them move. Elon has helped do that. I thought he was pretty bold when they talked about, the latest snag they talked about why we won't get there by 2024 is because we don't have the spacesuits. And I'm like, really? What kind of people are you that can't make a spacesuit in 4 years? If it's going to take you more than a year and a half to make a spacesuit, then there's something wrong with who's ever doing your spacesuit contract. You need to either give them more money or you need to fire them and get another contractor to make the spacesuits. I thought it was pretty neat when Elon had basically my same opinion there and said, yeah, I'll get them done for you. No problem. Now, my problem is that the Crew One spacesuits look like something out of a really bad sci-fi movie. They're horrible. In my opinion, they are horrible, horrible suits. Now they look good and they function, and I should just shut up. But they look like, again, you expect them to take the helmets off and it'll be the apes from Planet of the Apes making their return. It's just a silly looking space. The Apollo suits, that's a space. That's what real astronauts wore. None of this stuff that looks like you can be riding a bicycle streamlined around the track and probably win because you'll be breathing pure oxygen. But hey, we all have our different stuff. But yeah, I'll tell you about when I watched the Apollo 11 launch. In those days, you could get a pass to go onto NASA property, and you would be about 4 miles from the launch pad. And the pass was for however many people could fit into your car. Now, this was the 60s. A lot of cars didn't even have seat belts. Car seats were something that only rich people had to protect their little kids. My mother worked in a doctor's office and was mentioning to one of the patients how much her son was interested in space. And he says, well, I can get you a pass. You want to go watch the launch? And she was like, yeah. He comes home with the pass. I'm all excited. And she says, why don't you round up some of the neighborhood kids and we'll go? And so I went around, and the kids are like, yeah. And the parents are like, sure, go ahead. Go ahead and put as many kids in that car as you can and drive 60 miles at high speed. And it's no big deal. And so here we had this car full of kids, and my mother, who with all the kids so excited, was like, why did I do this? I could have taken my son and my 2 daughters, and that would have been fine, but I had to get all these other people. And so we went down for the launch, and I had a pair of binoculars and could see what was happening as the helicopters were over. And we had the radio in the car, AM radio, of course, in those days. And the local station was doing the countdown. There it goes, and the rocket lights up. And the people all around are like, hey, what's wrong? There's no noise. And of course, Science Nerd is explaining that just a minute, it takes about 5 seconds per mile. So in about 15 seconds, you'll hear the noise. And the noise from a Saturn rocket is something that it is so hard to describe. It's a wave of sound. It's louder than almost anything you've ever heard. And it rumbles the whole ground. And I think it was at another launch where I was standing on the roof of the car. I think it was Apollo 12 when we went to that launch. And I'm standing on the roof of the car, and the rumbling and shaking was so much that I almost fell off the roof of the car with my tripod and my camera. So a Saturn launch is tremendous. A shuttle launch, that's pretty good. But a Saturn launch is utterly amazing. And even the largest rockets now that Elon launching don't rumble and 70s cars as Tesla makes like 70s rumble cars will shake you right out of the seats. So it's an amazing thing for those of us who were lucky enough to have seen a Saturn launch. Great day. We drove home. We got stopped at the Dairy Queen and had some ice cream. See, remember all that stuff? Start thinking back. And in those days, Space Center was a little more accessible. 9/11 was still a long way away. On Sundays, you could take your private car and drive around the Space Center and look at stuff. You didn't have to have, there were just signs that said, "Don't go here." My grandmother took me down there one day, and we're driving through the Space Center, and I said, "Oh, that's a neat antenna." There was this big dish antenna. I said, "I wish we could go down there." And she just makes a right turn onto this road that said, "No visitors, no tourists." We drove down, and I'm looking at that antenna, and this guard comes along and says, "Ma'am, you're not supposed to be here." "Oh, I'm sorry, officer. I didn't realize that." He says, "Well, you take the boy, you get away from here. We'll call it even." So we went away, and I said, "Well, wow, Grandma, thanks." And we drove to the base of the Saturn launch pad, and it was just an amazing sight. And when I get into my curmudgeonly, when you were there for launch, you went to the visitor center at the Cape.
Yeah, I went ahead and got the VIP tickets too. I was at the Saturn 5, viewing area. So we were about 3 miles away from the launch pad.
That's a great spot to watch it. I've not seen it from there, but I know the area, and I've been to the Saturn 5 Center a few times, and I have annual passes to the Cape, so we don't go there as much as I would like to. But, the curmudgeon in me complains about the fact that it used to be you could that they had science demonstrations where they would take a guy who worked on the missions, and they'd say, "Okay, your turn. You need to go to the visitor center, and you're going to spend the next week explaining what you do." Some of them loved it, and some of them hated it, but they all knew what they were doing, and they all had a good idea of how to explain things without being too boring. At least to a science nerd, they weren't boring. And so now it's a lot of films and a lot of flash and a lot of fluff, and some of it is like, why are they talking about this? And it comes back to the no Buck Rogers. Other than people like me, there's not a lot of people who will pay money to get your science lecture, so they have to kind of hide the science in the fiction part of it. Since COVID, it's been kind of a lot harder to meet and talk to some of the astronauts, and but it's gotten better. I hope to go down there for a launch soon. I don't know which one. But even if you can't get to the Cape, Titusville has a nice space park dedicated to the astronauts, and there's various plaques and graphics that talk about the space flights, and it's right across the river. And from there, you can see and hear the rockets go off. And very busy place during rocket. I, again, as a dreamer, and when they first started talking about the shuttle, there was the specifications were there was going to be a shuttle launch every 2 weeks, clockwork, and of course that didn't happen much. they also talked about the fact that there were going to be, that the odds of some kind of accident were 1 in 25. 1 in 20, every 25 launches, there was going to be something that went afoul. And we lost 2 shuttles during that whole time. And we lost the first one because NASA had some incompetent people there, and they were worried, and it was, I'm a ham radio operator. In those days, you didn't have NASA on TV, that all the cable companies didn't have it. It set up a little ham TV station at the house. I had a satellite dish, and I could get NASA TV right off the satellite, and I was pumping that into my ham radio TV transmitter, and I was going to send it out. And I was heading to work that morning, and at that time I worked about 30 miles from my house. And I said, you know, it got pretty darn cold last night. I don't think that they're going to launch after the solids being that cold. And if I turn my transmitter on, I'm going to be transmitting dead air for 8 or 12 hours until I get home from work. And so I didn't turn on the transmitter. And I went to work, and I worked for a company that built boat radars and radios. They called Decca Marine. And the main office was in New York, but they had this office down here. We had some visitors come from the New York office, and we all ran outside to watch the launch. And I could see where the one booster, you know, if you remember, the one booster kind of makes a swirl like that. And I saw that, and I'm yelling, RTLS, RTLS. Those people like, what? I said, return to launch. That's the shuttle. I saw that one booster, and I figured, okay, that's the orbiter. It's making that typical turn for the return to launch abort. And you know, it was going to land, and there were going to be the astronauts, and we go, oh yeah, okay, yeah, we had a little problem, but we're going to do it again. And so it was devastating, absolutely devastating to find out that there was such a horrible accident. And the Jules Bergman still alive, and he was doing some of the coverage, and it was the one time I was pretty off at him, because one of the boosters coming in, and the booster, and it was going down, and like, well, look, there's a parachute. We don't think they had a launch escape system, but maybe the astronauts are okay. And I'm like, come on, you're a science communicator. You know better than that. Don't get people's hopes. Those people are done. And you know, when we found out that they had survived the initial blast, and they were found with their masks on, and probably died when the crew capsule hit the ocean at maybe supersonic speeds. I don't remember how fast it was, but it you know, there were no parachutes and nothing to slow it down. And my friend of mine who was a ham radio operator, he had a lot of antennas aimed at that area and some radios, and was listening. And he knew 3 days before the rest of the world knew that they had found the capsule on the ground, on the bottom. He said, yeah, keep watching the news. They're going to make an announcement soon. Sure enough. And it was sad. That was a very sad time for space people. And it slowed us down. We had Columbia, and I had at that time I was working for a small university. I had gotten out. I was in the aerospace business from 86 to 98. I worked for General Electric, Aerospace, Lockheed Martin. And then I took a job with a small university called DeLand, still close enough I could step outside my office and see the launches. And I watched Columbia launch somewhere. And when I got up in the morning after integrated, I was like, wow, horrible. And it was not long after that where I had gotten the domain name spaceweekly.com and set up a website, and I got to go and be there for the return to launch. And it was great to see how it, among the people that were there, it was like a circus. There were a lot of people there really wanting to see it happen and watching let it go. And I got to shake hands with Gene Kranz. I've got pictures where, I was 2 feet away from John Glenn, and I got a neat picture of him that's one of my favorites. It struck me funny that the guys from American Chopper, I don't know if you've ever heard of that show, they build motorcycles, their whole crew was there. I got to shake hands with Paulie, the young kid, and they were all excited about it. So it was people from across the spectrum who wanted to see the shuttle go off, and go. They had a delay, and I forget how long it was delayed, days or a week. I went down there for the second one, and then it went off, which to me was reminiscent of the first, because I went down there with a friend of mine, and we stayed across the river from Titusville, and they called the launch abort, and we're heading back, talking on the ham radio, and he's talking to a friend of his who says, well, I got a car pass, and I can't be here next launch. I got to work. He says, would you like it? And it's like, oh yeah. So it worked out that we got to see it from 4 times closer than we would have gone off on the main day. And I still remember that day when they put Ronald Reagan on the phone, and he says he's wishing astronauts, good luck, and forget everything he said, but the one phrase he said, he says, we are Americans. We are the first. We are the best. And the crowd kind of roared. A while later, the rocket went off, and it was, of course, the first time that we launched astronauts with solid rocket boosters, and the original shuttle did have an escape system, and there was all the debate between launching it unmanned first, such, which didn't go very far. It was a great time. I was really looking forward to those shuttle launches every 2 weeks from then on, and we had a lot of launches, not the amount that they would. And as a curmudgeon, I was upset that they were deorbiting the external tank. That there was a group of folks that said, we can take these external tanks, and with just a tiny amount of extra fuel, we can put them in a parking orbit and then grab them and use those as the basis for a space station. And that to me was, wow, that would be great. Can you imagine with a couple hundred shuttle launches, all those have the size of the station that you could have built, but that wasn't the focus, and so they didn't do that. And of course, if you interviewed somebody technically, they'll give you all the technical reasons why you shouldn't. And I'm like, yeah, you know, maybe we shouldn't go to orbit. Maybe we should just stay on Earth and feed all the poor people, because, you know, when we feed the poor people, we get a lot more poor people. And when we give our money to the space program, we get stuff that saves people's lives. We get medicines and drugs and techniques of doing things, and we get Tang. No, I just, and you know, there's folks say, well, you know, we get Velcro, and then somebody said, well, really, Velcro was invented before the space program, and yes, that's true, but the biggest uses of it came as the space program went on. So we get stuff that may not have been totally developed for the space program, but ended up becoming better products or better use. We have devices now that we only dreamed of. You know, when I was a kid, Johnny Quest had a walkie-talkie where he could have voice communications with Haji, and I'm like, wow, wouldn't that be cool? But how could you ever get TV camera and a color TV display all in something you could hold in your hand? And now my wife FaceTimes me from the store saying, hey, do you want this tomato sauce, or do you want that tomato sauce? And I'm like, wow, I'm Johnny Quest. We had, when you think of the summer of '69, one of the other big events besides the moon landing was big concert on the East Coast, and everybody in my generation claimed to have gone there. And if that was true, there would have been like 20 million people there. But there were a few 100,000, 200 or 400. I don't remember the exact number, but there were lots of people there at Woodstock. And some of them went in the gate, went their separate directions, and didn't see each other for 3 days till the concert was over, because they had no way of finding each other. In '71, my first trip to Disney World, which is having their 50th anniversary this year, my first trip to Disney World, we had to plan, say, okay, if we get separated at 1 o'clock, we're going to meet at the castle at that square. Okay. But we won't get lost. And sure enough, we'd wander away and get back there. And because our watches were manually set, you know, we'd have to wait probably 5 or 10 minutes because everybody's watch was different, but the whole family would show up there. Now I got a GPS that tells me exactly where I can call the family and say, hey, I'm in line at Space Mountain. And it's technology that back then was just, and you know, as a curmudgeon, when I first saw the talks about cell phones, 73, 72, I was an electronics technician by then, and I was working on radios, E-type radios and that kind of stuff. And they were talking about how these handheld phones, which of course at that time were like bags, you would have all of these stations all around in grids, and as you move from one to the other, your transmission from your phone will be picked up by the various poles. And I'm like, okay, maybe in the big cities, maybe in New York, maybe in the big metropolitan areas, that'll work out for all those business people that just have to have phones with them all the time. But in little old Daytona Beach, they are never going to put up the hundreds of towers that you need to make that work. Lo and behold, I got my iPhone 8. It does exactly that. And it's one of the reasons why ham radio is having some issues. I'm president of the Daytona Beach Amateur. I will talk to kids, and I'm like, look, I can talk to in my car. I can talk to all over the world. I've talked to people in Italy, and they're like, oh yeah, well, what's their phone number? I'll talk to them. I'm like, wow, they don't understand, because the technology for your cell phone to work is it is a lot more complicated than people think. I've had people saying, well, I'll call you, but it won't work. I'm right next to you. And it's like, wait, it has to go to that tower. The tower has to go to the switching system. It has to come all around. And by the time it gets to you, that signal has traveled many miles. It's not just going from here to there. The walkie-talkie, it goes from here to there, and there's nothing in between. So it just amazing to see what the space program has given us, either directly or indirectly. It's
Well,
always,
and
yeah.
I think from an indirect standpoint, you know, you had all these trained engineers and kind of a very technological, systematic way of approaching problems and coming with solutions. And then that entire trained workforce, you know, goes out into the private sector. And now the cost of engineers, like, you know, after the Apollo program is very, very affordable, which I think led to kind of a lot of these innovations.
Now that's very interesting. I have never thought of it that way, because most of my life I've worked around engineers. I've been a technician. The group that I worked with in General Electric was called the Apollo Support Division, and they would have the astronauts there once in a while, and they would do some simulations. And by the time I got there, it was the late 80s. And so some of the guys that were working there were the old curmudgeonly retiring, I got to put in a couple more years to get my pension. But they had some neat stories. A fellow named Floyd told me about how he was they had a big dome for the simulators. Simulators were a big thing and different in those days. And he had Jim Lovell in the cockpit of a jet, a simulated cockpit, and this dome was all around you, so about a 180 degree. And so he's sitting on a chair that they put on the platform where the cockpit was. Now, it wasn't a moving simulator, so you just sat there and everything moved around you. But he's there taking notes about what Lovell is doing, and his Lovell was a good guy, but he was also a joker. The rest of the astronauts, he takes the stick and he goes like this, and everything on the screen just turns that way. And Floyd fell out of the chair because out of the corner of his eyes, you could see all that motion, and his body tried to adapt to that motion that was happening on the screen that he really wasn't concentrating on, but was there. So he learned something about simulators and we used to kid him about a seatbelt for his office chair. So they had it was a great story. They would talk about the astronauts as real people. So many times for those of us, they were like gods. And those guys, oh yeah, I went to lunch with Neil. He's great. Which is why, as a curmudgeon, I was really upset with First Man. It was a movie that had so many things wrong with it. The inside of the spacecraft was dirty in that movie, and those people you would never have dirt inside of a spacecraft, not only because of the technical reasons, but because those people were proud of the stuff they worked on. And if you had grit and dirt floating around that could get into relays and other equipment, you could kill the mission by not wiping up. And so I was pretty upset with the whole dark tone and to act like Neil's whole life was defined by the death of his daughter. It was just silly because from the people I've talked to, he was a personable guy and wasn't a gloomy Gus that sat in the. You know, I would have loved to met Wally Schirra. Again, as a kid, the first Apollo launch was Apollo 7 and the Wally Walton Don show, and they were doing the signs, you know, because they had the TV camera, and they would make these paper signs, and it says our was it Wally? One of them made up a sign that says, "Are you a turtle?"
Yeah.
And that was an old joke. I don't know if you ever heard that, but it was an old joke that if somebody asked you, "Are you a turtle?" and you answered incorrectly, then you had to buy the person a drink. And so they flashed this sign, and all of Mission Control is twittering and laughing. And as a kid, I'm trying to figure out what was going on, and I forget who was with me. And I said, "Why are they laughing?" And it's like, "Well, you know what the answer to that question is." I'm like, "Well, I'm not a turtle." "Well, now you got to buy me a drink."
Ah,
I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "Well, when they ask you that question, you're supposed to say, 'You bet your sweet bleep I am.'" And I'm like, "I said that word, I get my mouth washed out with soap." He says, "Right. That's why Mission Control can't answer them, and they all have to buy them drinks." So it was a great flight to watch Apollo 7, and it was sad reading later on how, you know, that flight kind of killed the careers of 3 guys.
yeah. One problem I have is I have a work meeting I have to attend in a
Oh
minute.
yeah. Sorry,
But
you get me talking, I can
no,
talk forever.
that's the whole point of the project, is to go and collect these personal stories that you know, people's point of views and information and all of that. So I really appreciate you sharing this with me. I learned so much, a lot of details about that time that just don't make it through the history books.
Well, if you ever get a chance, you want to chat again, let me know. We'll sit down. Do you get to Florida very often?
About once every 5 years, but I
Yeah.
think I'll come down for the Artemis 1 launch. So maybe we can see that.
That'd be great. I'll drive down to Titusville and we can have lunch together and bore you for another couple hours.
That would be fantastic. Well, until then.
Thanks, Nathan. It was great. And let's hope we see a launch.
Absolutely. Okay, have a good rest of your day.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.